There's a hole in your heart that can't be filled. Journey every day to wake up and wonder where she is.
Just trying to figure out where my daughter is. It's horrible. It's not a good feeling. It's just, I wish I knew where she was.
A hidden link between two disappearances could hold the answer to finding Summer Wells. In 2009, 21-year-old Rose Marie Bly vanished on her way to meet a relative. Days later, her car turned up in a small town parking lot, keys gone, no signs of a struggle. In 2021, her 5-year-old niece, Summer Wells, disappeared from inside her rural Tennessee home in broad daylight. No footprints, no screams, no body. For years, investigators treated these cases as separate mysteries. By mapping their timelines side by side, dissecting witness statements long ignored, and tracing uncanny behavioral patterns that repeat across both cases, an entirely new trail of evidence begins to appear. One that could not only explain how Rose vanished, but also point straight to the truth about Summer. This isn't just a telling of old facts. It's the unearthing of hidden links and overlooked details that may hold the power to crack both mysteries wide open. A hidden link between two disappearances could hold the answer to finding Summer Wells. In 2009, 21-year-old Rose Marie Bly set out for a short drive to meet a relative in Cushing, Wisconsin. She never made it. 5 days later, her car was found in a small town parking lot near the Grantsburg post office. Keys missing, no damage, no sign of a struggle, and no sign of Rose. 12 years later, in 2021, her 5-year-old niece, Summer Wells, vanished from inside her rural home in Rogersville, Tennessee. It was daylight. Her brothers were nearby. Her mother was just outside. There were no footprints, no screams, no body. Summer seemed to have simply evaporated. These two disappearances, separated by more than a decade, hundreds of miles, and vastly different life circumstances, are linked by blood. Rose and Summer are aunt and niece. Both cases remain unsolved. Both are considered cold by law enforcement. And both have left a trail of questions that neither investigators nor the public can put to rest. Authorities have been clear in their statements. There is no confirmed evidence that the cases are connected. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Polk County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin maintain that, while the coincidence is unusual, it is just that, a coincidence. Yet coincidences of this magnitude rarely sit quietly in the public imagination. For years, social media communities, independent investigators, and true crime researchers have speculated about a hidden link, a repeating pattern, or a shared factor that has yet to be uncovered. The reason this connection is worth revisiting now is not only the eerie family tie, but the fact that both cases suffer from the same investigative roadblock, a near-complete absence of physical evidence. In Rose's case, there is a car without clues. In Summer's case, there is no vehicle, no trail, and no forensic footprint. Both women vanished into an informational void, an abyss where speculation fills the space that facts should occupy. Missing persons cases are tragically common in the United States. Thousands are reported each year. Many are resolved quickly, others linger for months or years. But having two members of the same immediate family vanish without a trace, in separate incidents, in separate states, 12 years apart, is extraordinarily rare. Statistically, the odds are staggering. In most families, a disappearance, if it happens at all, is an isolated tragedy. When it happens twice, it often signals either an environmental vulnerability, a repeated behavioral pattern, or the targeting of that family by an outside force. That is why examining them side by side could matter. Even if the two vanishings are ultimately unrelated, the process of comparison can reveal overlooked details in each. The absence of answers in both cases has created a vacuum, and a vacuum quickly fills with theories, rumors, and outright falsehoods. For Rose, speculation ranges from voluntary disappearance to domestic foul play to random abduction. For Summer, the theories span from accidental death, covered up by family, to stranger abduction, to wandering off into the dense Tennessee woods. Social media has amplified these theories, often blurring the line between informed analysis and baseless accusation. TikTok creators, YouTube channels, and Facebook groups have built entire audiences dissecting these cases, sometimes bringing fresh leads, other times muddying the waters with misinformation. This constant churn of competing narratives has both helped and hindered the official investigations. In some instances, public tips have opened new lines of inquiry. In others, they have forced investigators to chase dead ends or counter harmful rumors. Part of the fascination and frustration lies in the image of the victims themselves. Rose was a young mother, newly married, with 2 small children at home. By all accounts, her trip the night she vanished was routine and local. There was no long journey, no high-risk behavior, nothing that clearly explained why she never returned. Summer was a child in her own home, surrounded by family. She was not walking alone on a remote road or in a dangerous neighborhood. For many, the combination of these circumstances triggers a deep unease. If 2 members of the same family can vanish so completely, in such different contexts, without leaving a shred of physical evidence, what does that say about the safety of anyone? The goal of this analysis is to do what has not yet been done in a structured public way: compare the timelines of both disappearances in parallel, identify recurring elements in witness behavior, environmental factors, and investigative blind spots, and highlight overlooked or underreported details that may, in light of the other case, take on new significance. This is not an attempt to replace the work of official investigators, but to synthesize publicly available information in a way that could help generate new leads. By bringing the 2 cases into the same frame, patterns invisible when they are viewed in isolation may suddenly emerge. If there is a shared factor, be it a person, a method, or a vulnerability, it deserves to be recognized and pursued. If there is no connection, then clarifying that fact can help refocus resources and public attention where they are most needed. For the Bly family, the stakes could not be higher. Every year without answers deepens the wound and dims the hope of resolution. For investigators, time erodes evidence, memories, and the willingness of potential witnesses to come forward. For the public, these cases are a test of whether persistent attention and methodical examination can make a difference in the most stubborn of mysteries. And for Summer Wells, who, if alive, would now be 8 years old, every day without answers is a day justice is delayed. This is why the 2 stories must be told together. Rose's case offers a starting point, a framework of last known movements, unexplained choices, and investigative decisions that may echo in Summer's disappearance. Summer's case, in turn, presents a set of circumstances, domestic setting, daylight timing, absence of struggle, that may shed new light on the earlier mystery. The overlap may be coincidence, or it may be a thread worth pulling. If it is the latter, pulling hard enough could unravel both mysteries and, at last, bring Summer Wells home. Rose Marie Bly entered the world in the late 1980s, born into the quiet rural setting of St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. She grew up under the watchful eye of her mother, Candace Harrer, and alongside her younger sister, Candace Bly, who would later become the mother of Summer Wells. Those who knew Rose described her as petite, standing about 5 feet tall, weighing around 110 pounds, with a frame that seemed delicate but carried the resilience of someone used to navigating life's difficulties. She had the casual style of a small-town young woman. On the night she disappeared, she wore a white tank top under a green V-neck sweater, blue jeans, and flip-flops. By 2009, Rose's life had shifted into a new chapter. At just 21 years old, she had already become a wife and mother. Her marriage to Christopher Larson was still in its first year, having begun in February. Together, they were raising 2 very young daughters, both under the age of 2, in a modest home along River Road. On the surface, it was the image of a young family building a life together. Beneath the surface, however, there were cracks, some wide enough to see, others only whispered about. Court records and police reports show that Rose and Christopher's relationship had been marked by turbulence. Just weeks before her disappearance, in early August 2009, an incident of domestic disturbance had ended with Rose herself being arrested for disorderly conduct. Details suggest an argument escalated, perhaps fueled by frustration, perhaps by deeper issues that had been simmering. Those close to her believed the couple reconciled afterward, but whether true harmony returned is unclear. The tension of those weeks now sits in the shadow of her disappearance, raising questions that have never been fully answered. Rose also carried a physical vulnerability into those final weeks. Her mother would later tell reporters that Rose had fallen from a horse not long before she went missing. The accident, according to her, left Rose complaining of persistent headaches, symptoms that Candace Harrer worried might indicate a concussion or other brain injury. No medical confirmation of this was ever recorded, but her mother's suspicion added another layer to the mystery. If Rose was dealing with disorientation or lapses in judgment, could that have played a role in her disappearance? In family dynamics, Rose was both daughter and sister. Her relationship with her mother, Candace Harrer, seemed close. Candace would become one of the most vocal advocates in the search for her. With her younger sister, Marie Bly, the bond was that of siblings who had grown up in the same rural rhythm, though by 2009, their adult lives had taken them to different states. Marie Bly was living far away in Tennessee, raising her own children. Neither could have imagined then that, 12 years later, Candace would find herself living the same nightmare, the sudden disappearance of a loved one, when her daughter, Summer, vanished without a trace. Summer Moon Utah Wells came into the world in 2016 as the youngest of 4 children in the Wells family. She was the only daughter of Don Wells and Candace Bly, and the baby of the household. With 3 older brothers to alternately protect her, tease her, and on that fateful June day in 2021, be told to keep an eye on her. Physically, she was unmistakable, a small, lovely 5-year-old with closely cropped blonde hair. A cut her mother had given her shortly before she disappeared, and bright blue eyes that seemed always in motion. Neighbors and relatives often described her as spirited, sometimes stubborn, with a playful streak that made her both endearing and a handful. Summer's world was the hollows and hills of Beech Creek, a sparsely populated rural community in eastern Tennessee. The Wells property sat at the end of Ben Hill Road, surrounded by steep woods, thick underbrush, and a maze of rough tracks and trails. This was a place where cell service faded, where the silence could be absolute at night, and where a person could be only yards from a house yet invisible behind the trees. For Summer, it was both home and playground. She roamed barefoot in the yard, splashed in nearby creeks, and rode in the family's beat-up vehicles down the winding roads. Her mother has said she loved to help with outdoor chores, planting flowers, tending the garden, or carrying buckets of water. Her family was as much a part of the story as the setting. Don Wells, her father, had a complicated history, a criminal record, including past charges unrelated to his daughter's disappearance, and a personality that could be both defensive and outspoken in interviews. Candace Bly, her mother, carried her own history, the unresolved pain of her sister Rose's disappearance, the burden of raising 4 children in a remote location, and the scrutiny that would intensify after Summer vanished. The 3 older brothers formed the rest of the household, boys who, by their own account, spent that summer day inside watching television while their mother and grandmother worked in the yard. Life for the Wells family was shaped by isolation. Trips to town meant a drive into Rogersville. Neighbors were few and scattered. The area's beauty, its green hills, shaded hollows, and trickling streams, masked a reality. In a crisis, help could be slow to arrive, and visibility was limited to the few feet in front of you. That isolation became a critical detail when investigators began searching for a missing 5-year-old in terrain that could swallow a person without leaving a trace. In the weeks before her disappearance, nothing publicly indicated that Summer was in danger. She was enrolled in church activities, seen playing outside, photographed with her family. Yet the day she vanished unfolded with a cruel simplicity. She was there, and then she was not. The moment her mother noticed her absence began a chain of events that would thrust the Wells family into the glare of national attention, an attention that Candace Bly had experienced once before, from afar, when her sister's face appeared on missing person posters in Wisconsin. What makes the biographies of Rose and Summer so intertwined is not just the bloodline, but the eerie symmetry in the circumstances of their lives and the voids left in their absences. Both lived in rural settings, where natural beauty and seclusion coexist with vulnerability. Both were last seen by people they knew and trusted. Both vanished in ways that left investigators without the physical evidence that so often breaks a case open. And in both instances, family members became the immediate focus of public curiosity, sympathy, and suspicion, an intense and often punishing spotlight. The human side of these biographies is crucial. Rose was not just a name in a file, she was a mother who left behind two little girls who would grow up without answers. Summer is not just a photograph on a poster. She is a child whose toys still sit where she left them, whose room remains frozen in time. Their stories are not interchangeable, but they are connected through family, through loss, and through the unresolved questions that hang over both cases. As we move deeper into the investigation, these personal histories provide more than background. They are the framework through which we must interpret timelines, evaluate witness statements, and measure the plausibility of competing theories. Understanding who Rose was before August 21, 2009, and who Summer was before June 15, 2021, is essential to grasping not just the facts of their disappearances, but the meaning of their connection. The summer evening of August 21, 2009, began without warning of what it would become. For Rose Marie Bly, the day unfolded much like any other in her small town life in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin. She was a 21-year-old mother of two, juggling the demands of her young daughters and the complexities of a marriage that, while only months old, had already shown signs of strain. As dusk settled over the quiet stretch of River Road where she lived, Rose made a decision that, in hindsight, would become the central mystery of her life. She was going out for the evening. At around 7:30 p.m., Rose left her home. The plan, as she told those around her, was simple: meet a cousin at a bar in Cushing, a short drive away, for karaoke. The distance was no more than 4 or 5 miles, the kind of trip she could have made with her eyes closed. She drove off in her white 2001 Pontiac Grand Am, a familiar, unremarkable vehicle in a town where nothing much ever happened. Somewhere along that route, the expected narrative of the night fractured. At 9:00 p.m., Rose called her husband, Christopher Larson. The call was brief and without alarm. She told him she would be home before midnight. There was no hint in her voice, as far as anyone recalls, that anything was wrong. But it would be the last known contact anyone had with her. Rose never arrived in Cushing. Her cousin never saw her. She never returned home. There were no sightings along the road, no reports of a stranded car or a woman in distress. The road between her house and the bar is not the kind where you can disappear unnoticed. There are houses, driveways, and local traffic. Yet whatever happened to Rose occurred in that narrow window of time between her departure and the phone call, or in the silent hours that followed, without leaving a trace. Days passed before the first significant development surfaced. On August 26, 2009, 5 days after she was last seen, Rosie's car was found in Grantsburg, Wisconsin, roughly 30 miles from her home and about 15 miles from Cushing. The location was a public parking lot near the post office, a spot often used by truckers and passersby, but not a place Rose was known to frequent. The car itself was intact, without signs of forced entry or damage. The keys were missing. There were no obvious clues inside, no purse, no phone, no personal items that could point investigators toward her path in those missing days. The placement of the vehicle deepened the mystery. Grantsburg was familiar to Rose. She had attended high school there and still had relatives in the area. But there was no clear reason for her to abandon her car there, if she had been the one to park it at all. Without witnesses to confirm who left the vehicle, investigators could not determine whether she had driven there voluntarily, been coerced, or never made it there alive. Once the car was found, the search effort expanded. Over 200 tips were logged, and more than 150 people were interviewed by the Polk County Sheriff's Office. Friends, family members, and acquaintances were questioned about Rose's relationships, her mental state, and her movements in the days leading up to her disappearance. Christopher Larson, her husband, faced intense scrutiny given the statistical likelihood of intimate partners being involved in disappearances. His recent domestic disputes with Rose, coupled with his decision to file for divorce just 3 weeks after she vanished, drew public suspicion. Yet Christopher passed a polygraph test, and investigators publicly stated they had no evidence to charge him. Searches were conducted in and around the areas significant to Rose's life: St. Croix Falls, Cushing, and Grantsburg. Fields, wooded areas, and roadside ditches were combed. Cadaver dogs were deployed but did not pick up a scent trail from the vehicle. With each fruitless day, the the trail grew colder. The absence of physical evidence became the defining characteristic of the case. No one reported seeing Rose after her phone call to Christopher. No security cameras captured her image. Unsurprising, perhaps, given the rural context and the limited surveillance infrastructure in 2009. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles or altercations along her expected route. Even forensic examination of the car yielded nothing that could be used to reconstruct her last hours. For investigators, the case became a puzzle with missing pieces from the very start. For the public, it was a blank canvas onto which any theory could be projected. Some believed she had left voluntarily to escape a troubled marriage, perhaps aided by someone she trusted. But that theory clashed with the reality that she had left her children, her money, and her identification behind, an unlikely move for a young mother planning a new life. Others suspected she had been abducted, either by a stranger or someone she knew, and that the Grantsburg parking lot was a calculated drop-off point for her vehicle to mislead investigators. Her mother, Candace Harrer, clung to the possibility that an accident or medical episode played a role. She recalled Rose's complaints of headaches after her recent fall from a horse and wondered if confusion or disorientation had led her astray. But without a trace of Rose, living or dead, that line of thought could not be proven. The timing of the disappearance, the discovery of the car, and the absence of any confirmed sightings between those points created a void in the timeline that has never been filled. What happened between 7:30 p.m. and the moment her car appeared in Grantsburg remains a black hole in the record. In the years since, the case has remained officially open but inactive, with no new public breakthroughs. In 2019, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, the Polk County Sheriff's Office released a short documentary-style video recounting the known facts in an effort to renew public interest. Age progression images have been created, showing what Rose might look like today. But the appeals have not brought the answers her family longs for. For Candace Bly, Rose's younger sister, the loss was devastating but distant. She was living in Tennessee, raising her children, and could only watch from afar as the search for her sister hit dead ends. Yet in 2021, when her own daughter Summer would vanish under entirely different circumstances, the emotional distance between the two cases would collapse. Rose's absence had already cast a shadow over the Bly family. Summer's disappearance would plunge them back into a nightmare they thought they could never face twice. What makes Rose's case so confounding is its perfect silence. No one saw the struggle. No one heard the plea for help. The trail does not taper off, it simply stops. And in that silence, the possibilities multiply endlessly. The Grantsburg parking lot becomes both a starting point and an ending, a physical marker in a story otherwise made of air. Until someone comes forward with the missing piece, or some overlooked clue is found, Rose Marie Bly remains exactly where she has been for over a decade, nowhere and everywhere, all at once. On the evening of June 15, 2021, the Wells family home at the end of Ben Hill Road in Beech Creek, Tennessee, seemed like any other quiet summer evening. The sun had begun to dip behind the surrounding hills, casting long shadows across the yard, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly tilled soil and blooming flowers. Summer Wells, the youngest in the family at 5 years old, was inside, helping her mother and grandmother plant flowers in small pots near the house. She had always loved gardening, eagerly carrying water and arranging petals with the meticulous care of someone far older than her years. After completing a few chores, Candace Bly, Summer's mother, stepped outside to help her own mother finish some work around the yard. Summer remained in the basement, playing quietly as she often did. Candace instructed the 3 older boys, ranging from 7 to 12 years old, to keep an eye on their little sister while she was gone. It seemed like a simple, ordinary arrangement. A child in her own home, brothers nearby, and a mother just a few steps away. Nothing about the evening suggested that it would end in tragedy. When Candace returned after only a short time, the house was silent in a way that immediately set her instincts on edge. Summer was gone. She was not in the basement, not in the yard, not anywhere within sight. Candace called for her, but there was no response. Panic surged as she realized that Summer had vanished without a trace. The family frantically searched the immediate surroundings, calling neighbors, walking the winding dirt roads, and scanning the wooded areas that bordered the property. The initial minutes stretched into hours, and with each passing moment, the fear intensified. Law enforcement was notified promptly, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over the investigation. The search was immediate and exhaustive, deploying every tool and tactic available for a child missing in rural terrain. Over 3,000 soil samples were collected and analyzed across the surrounding forested hills and creek areas. Trained search and rescue dogs combed the property and the adjacent woodlands. Drones and helicopters scoured the landscape from above, mapping every shadowed hollow, every creek bend, every footpath. Yet despite the massive effort, no trace of Summer was discovered. No footprints, no disturbed foliage, no clothing, no toys, no hint of where she might have gone. It was as though she had simply disappeared into thin air. The scale of the search reflected the seriousness of the situation. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search, combing the property and neighboring areas. Every tip was logged and investigated. Agencies coordinated with local, state, and federal resources to attempt to reconstruct Summer's last known movements. Cameras from nearby homes and businesses were checked, but the rural setting and limited coverage offered no clarity. Every lead was examined, but none yielded results. The silence of the landscape was absolute, the missing child invisible to the eyes of all who sought her. As the days passed, the case began to attract national attention. News outlets across the United States covered the disappearance, highlighting the unusual circumstances, a child vanishing from her own home, under the watch of her family, in broad daylight. Social media amplified the story, creating both hope and frustration. Videos and posts speculated about potential abduction, foul play, or even accidental injury. TikTok videos, YouTube discussions, and Facebook posts dissected the home layout, hypothesized the movements of the children, and debated whether Summer could have wandered into the dense woods nearby. The story captured the public's imagination, generating both tips and, unfortunately, misinformation. Some commentators noted the striking parallels to older unsolved cases, drawing comparisons to other disappearances of children in rural settings. Others focused on the family itself, examining every detail of their daily routines, the behavior of the parents, and the supervision of the older siblings. Candace and Don Wells faced intense scrutiny, amplified by the speed and reach of social media. For a family already grieving and terrified, the intrusion added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. Despite the public attention, the investigation faced the same central challenge that often plagues missing child cases: a complete absence of physical evidence. The property was meticulously searched, every inch of surrounding forest evaluated, but nothing was found. There were no witnesses who had seen Summer leave the house. It was as though she had been removed from the landscape entirely, leaving investigators with only questions. The family's home and surrounding terrain are not easy to navigate. Beech Creek is marked by rolling hills, dense trees, and hidden gullies. While beautiful, the terrain can be treacherous for a child and challenging for searchers. Radio communication is limited in the area, which complicated the initial search efforts. Even experienced search and rescue teams had difficulty covering the area systematically. The very environment that had nurtured Summer's childhood, woods to explore, hills to climb, streams to play in, also became the landscape that swallowed her without a trace. As the investigation unfolded, every theory had to be examined. Could Summer have wandered into the woods alone? The search's extensive results suggest otherwise. Could she have been taken by a stranger? There were no signs of forced entry, no vehicles recorded nearby, no unknown individuals reported. Could there have been foul play inside the home, or by someone known to the family? Again, investigators could find no supporting evidence. Every plausible scenario hit a dead end. Media coverage fueled a constant flow of public attention. News stories highlighted the lack of leads. Social media speculated on possible abduction scenarios, and amateur investigators debated the layout of the Wells property, the timing of Candace's absence, and the role of the older siblings. Videos went viral analyzing shadows on the walls, footprints in the yard, and every other detail that could possibly explain her disappearance. Tips poured in, both serious and frivolous, further complicating the case. Some were investigated thoroughly, others were quickly dismissed. Even as weeks turned into months, the case remained unresolved. Progressed images of Summer were released to show what she might look like today, in the hopes that someone, somewhere, might recognize her. Local and state authorities maintained hotlines for tips, urging the public not to spread rumors or false information that could hinder the investigation. Yet, despite these efforts, Summer's whereabouts remain unknown, her disappearance a haunting void in the rural Tennessee landscape, a puzzle that refuses to be solved. What makes this disappearance particularly poignant is its combination of circumstances: a young child, inside her own home, in the care of family members, vanishing without warning or trace. It defies expectations, challenges assumptions about safety, and underscores the terrifying reality that children can be lost in an instant, even in the familiar and seemingly secure environment of their own home. The case of Summer Wells is a stark reminder of both vulnerability and mystery, a tragedy amplified by the inability of investigators, family, and community to locate any evidence that could illuminate her fate. When the cases of Rose Marie Bly and Summer Wells are placed side by side, the contrasts are striking, but so too are the parallels. Both vanishings defy easy explanation, yet each occurred in a distinct context that shaped how the disappearance unfolded, how the search was conducted, and how the public engaged with the story. Rose's disappearance began on the move. She was a 21-year-old adult, independent enough to drive herself, make her own plans, and change them without immediately raising alarm. On the evening she vanished, she was navigating the familiar backroads of Wisconsin, behind the wheel of her white Pontiac Grand Am, headed for a short social outing. In that sense, her disappearance fits into the pattern of cases where an adult vanishes somewhere between point A and point B. Mobility created possibilities. She could have deviated from her route willingly, been intercepted en route, or encountered trouble in an entirely different location. Summer's case could not be more different in that respect. She was only 5 years old, and the last place she was seen was her own home. She had no means of transportation, no ability to leave the property unnoticed except on foot, and no reason to do so without someone else prompting or carrying her. Her world that day was confined to the basement where she played, the yard where she gardened, and the immediate oversight of her family. Her disappearance was not a matter of vanishing somewhere along a route. It was the vanishing of the route itself. The only journey she was expected to make was from one room of her house to another, yet in that short distance she was lost. The settings in which these vanishings occurred underscore the differences. St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, where Rose lived, is rural but not isolated in the same way as Beech Creek. Roads connect small towns and villages. Houses are spaced but not entirely out of sight from one another. On the night Rose disappeared, she was moving through a network of public spaces, however sparsely populated. The discovery of her car in Grantsburg days later placed her disappearance in a location with potential for witnesses. This setting offered investigators a focal point for inquiry, even if that focal point yielded no breakthrough. Beech Creek, by contrast, is a place where the hills close in around you, and the nearest neighbor may be out of sight and earshot. The Wells family home sat at the end of a rough road, surrounded by dense trees, undergrowth, and uneven terrain. There was no parking lot where a vehicle might be spotted, no single landmark to serve as the scene of the disappearance. For searchers, this meant scouring acres of land where any sign could be hidden under leaves, brush, or in the folds of the landscape. For investigators, it meant confronting the possibility that there were no witnesses simply because there was no one there to see. Physical evidence tells an equally divergent story, or, more accurately, tells no story at all. In Rosie's case, there was at least an object to work with, her car. The vehicle's location, condition, and contents could be examined. The missing keys, the lack of damage, the absence of personal belongings inside, all of these details were clues, however frustratingly incomplete. The car served as a fixed point in the timeline, the last tangible link between her known movements and her disappearance. Investigators could ask, who parked it here? When? Did anyone see it arrive? Even though the answers remain elusive, the car itself is evidence that something happened after she left home. Summers' case offered no such anchor. There was no vehicle, no discarded item of clothing, no footprints leading into the woods, no fingerprints or DNA from an intruder. The search teams brought in tracking dogs, but whatever scent they picked up ended quickly, fading only a short distance from the house. Without a physical object to mark a transition point from presence to absence, the case became a void. In Rose's case, the car was the puzzle piece that didn't fit. In Summers, the puzzle was missing every piece entirely. The reactions of the families and communities to these disappearances also reflect the differences in their eras and circumstances. In 2009, when Rose vanished, social media had not yet become the omnipresent force it is today. Facebook existed, but its reach was far more limited. News traveled through local papers, television broadcasts, and word of mouth. The Grantsburg and St. Croix Falls communities rallied quietly but earnestly, organizing searches, putting up flyers, and sharing information through whatever channels they had. Candace Harrer, Rose's mother, became the public voice for the family, appealing for information and cooperating closely with law enforcement. By 2021, the landscape of public reaction had changed completely. Summers' disappearance exploded onto social media within hours. Hashtags trended, TikTok videos dissected every detail, YouTube channels hosted live streams speculating on theories, and Facebook groups dedicated to the case attracted tens of thousands of members. The response was immediate, global, and often overwhelming. While this brought an unprecedented number of eyes to the case, it also brought misinformation, conspiracy theories, and direct harassment toward the Wells family. Dawn and Candace found themselves not only under the scrutiny of investigators, but also the relentless judgment of strangers online. The same platforms that could spread a missing child's image to millions in minutes could also magnify rumor into perceived fact, creating noise that investigators had to wade through to find credible leads. In terms of law enforcement involvement, both cases drew the attention of multiple agencies, but here again, the scale and technology available at the time shaped the approach. For Rose, the investigation was led by the Polk County Sheriff's Office, with assistance from the FBI through the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Searches relied on ground teams, cadaver dogs, and traditional canvassing. Without surveillance footage or widespread cell phone tracking, the investigation depended heavily on human witnesses and physical search. Leads were followed, but the relatively small number of tips, about 200 in total, reflects both the scope of the case and the limitations of the time. Summers' disappearance mobilized the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI from the outset. Search operations deployed not only ground teams and tracking dogs but also drones, helicopters, and advanced mapping technology to calm. The number of tips soared into the thousands, a volume that would have been unthinkable in 2009. Digital forensics, examining cell phone records, online activity, and electronic communications, played a larger role. Yet, despite this arsenal of modern tools, the outcome mirrored Rose's. No confirmed sightings, no definitive leads, no resolution. The similarities between the cases lie in the absence, the missing person, the missing evidence, the missing answers, and in the shared experience of a family losing someone without warning or explanation. In both, the final moments before the disappearance are painfully ordinary. Rose was driving to see a relative. Summer was playing in her basement. There was no visible lead-up, no ominous prelude, nothing to mark those moments as the last. In both, the investigation hit an invisible wall almost immediately, unable to move past the point of disappearance, because there was nothing concrete to grasp. Yet, placing them side by side allows for a kind of insight that looking at them separately does not. It forces the question of whether the same type of offender could have operated in both contexts, or whether the similarities are only the surface reflections of entirely different events. It also underlines the reality that, despite advancements in technology, resources, and public engagement, a disappearance can still defy explanation in both 2009 and 2021. In the end, the parallels haunt, the contrasts confound, and the lack of answers in either case keeps the door open to speculation that one day, a breakthrough in one could illuminate the other. In the absence of decisive evidence, both cases have been defined as much by what people believe might have happened as by what is actually known. For Summer Wells, the first and most publicized possibility is abduction, either by someone known to the family or a stranger. The remote location of the Wells home makes a random, opportunistic kidnapping unlikely unless the abductor had some prior knowledge of the property and its routines. A person familiar with the family's habits, the layout of the house, and the lack of surveillance could, in theory, move quickly and avoid detection. Still, without witnesses or physical trace, the scenario remains conjecture, its plausibility resting entirely on motive and opportunity that have yet to be established. The second, and more controversial, theory is that a family member may have played a role, whether through deliberate harm or accidental injury followed by concealment. This is often the first suspicion in cases where a child disappears from within the home. The absence of forced entry and the narrow time window for the disappearance make it a possibility investigators cannot dismiss outright. Yet the same lack of evidence that frustrates the abduction theory also hampers this one. Nothing recovered from the property has confirmed foul play inside the home. In the court of public opinion, however, the inconsistencies and perceived contradictions in family statements have kept this theory alive. A third scenario for Summer is that she left the house on her own and met with an accident somewhere in the surrounding terrain. For a 5-year-old familiar with wandering the property, stepping outside unaccompanied would not be unusual. The challenge to this theory is the exhaustive search effort that followed. If she had simply become lost or injured nearby, it is difficult to reconcile that no sign of her was ever recovered, not even after days of concentrated ground and aerial searches. For Rose Marie Bly, the first theory also centers on abduction, this time during transit. She was driving alone to meet a relative, and her route would have taken her along roads with stretches of relative seclusion. An encounter with a stranger who persuaded or forced her to stop could account for her disappearance, and the later recovery of her vehicle in a location she may or may not have reached willingly. The problem is that the Grantsburg parking lot where her car was found should have offered some potential for witnesses, yet no one came forward to report anything unusual at the time her car would have arrived. The voluntary disappearance theory for Rose gains some traction from the fact that she was an adult, capable of making her own choices, and had recent marital problems that might have given her cause to leave. Those who entertain this scenario suggest she might have sought refuge with someone she knew, perhaps intending only a temporary absence. But this runs into the same logistical and emotional hurdles that make voluntary disappearance improbable in many cases. She left her children, her financial means, and her identification behind, and she made no attempt to contact family or friends in the years since. The theory implicating her husband, Christopher Larson, has been persistent, fueled by the domestic disturbance in the weeks before she vanished and his rapid move to file for divorce afterward. Such factors naturally attract suspicion. However, he passed a polygraph test, and there has never been sufficient evidence to charge him. This leaves the possibility in a kind of limbo, seen by some as plausible, but unsupported by verifiable proof. Linking the two cases, some have suggested that a single perpetrator, or a group, could have targeted the Bly family over a span of years. This idea gains strength from the rarity of two close relatives disappearing without a trace in separate incidents. Those who believe in such a connection point to the similar lack of evidence, the rural settings, and the absence of witnesses in both cases. In theory, someone with a vendetta against the family or a predatory interest could have acted twice under different circumstances. Yet the differences between the cases, geography, the victims' ages, and the context of disappearance pose significant challenges to the idea of a single offender. There is no shared suspect, no common evidence, and no overlap in investigative leads to support the connection beyond the family tie itself. Another version of the linkage theory is less about an external predator and more about an internal family dynamic, what some online communities label family secrets. In this narrative, both disappearances are the result of private conflicts, accidents, or misconduct concealed within the family, with each incident independent in its specifics but arising from the same culture of secrecy or dysfunction. It is a theory driven less by direct evidence and more by the circumstantial patterns seen in public records and family history. The problem is that it is almost entirely speculative, with no tangible proof linking either disappearance to a deliberate act by family members or to a pattern of concealment. Assessing these theories on their merits is an exercise in weighing plausibility against the vacuum of evidence. For both Summer and Rose, abduction by a known individual remains possible, particularly given the lack of signs of struggle and the absence of physical clues. The stranger abduction scenario is harder to sustain for Summer, given the isolation of the property, but more feasible for Rose, who was on the road. The voluntary departure theory, while common in adult missing person cases, is far less credible for Rose given her circumstances and entirely implausible for a 5-year-old child like Summer. The linkage theories are the most compelling in terms of narrative, but the weakest in terms of evidence. The shared surname, bloodline, and outcome invite speculation, yet without a concrete intersection in the investigative records, no common associates, no matching forensic signatures, the connection remains a matter of coincidence until proven otherwise. This does not mean the idea should be dismissed. On the contrary, keeping both cases in mind during investigative review could increase the chance of catching a detail in one that illuminates the other. But it does mean that the connection, if it exists, has so far left no visible trail. In the end, the theories serve less as definitive explanations and more as frameworks for where to look next. The absence of hard evidence in both cases means that no scenario can be elevated beyond possible without new information. The challenge for investigators, and for anyone studying these disappearances, is to keep each theory alive just enough to test it, without allowing any single narrative to dominate at the expense of pursuing all others. Somewhere within these possibilities lies the truth. Finding it will depend on spotting the detail that, until now, has remained invisible. When two disappearances occur within the same family, years apart, the most provocative question is whether the same hand could have reached into their lives twice. It is a question that invites both intuition and skepticism. The human mind is drawn to patterns, but a pattern without proof can mislead as easily as it can reveal. Those who argue for a shared perpetrator begin with the improbability of the coincidence. In statistical terms, it is uncommon for even one close family member to vanish without resolution. For two to do so under different circumstances pushes the bounds of probability. Supporters of this theory suggest a perpetrator with a sustained interest in, or grudge against, the family, a person whose motive could transcend opportunity, making them willing to adapt their method to different targets. If someone harbored an ongoing vendetta or a predatory fixation, the gap of 12 years could simply represent a long, dormant period between opportunities. From a behavioral standpoint, certain elements in both cases could, in theory, support the same offender profile. The ability to remove a victim without leaving a clear trail points to planning, familiarity with the environment, and a willingness to take calculated risks. It would require someone confident enough to act quickly and leave minimal physical trace, yet careful enough to avoid drawing attention in the critical first hours after the disappearance. If the same individual was responsible, they may have had personal knowledge of routines, vulnerabilities, and the absence of protective measures in both situations. Still, for all its intrigue, the one perpetrator theory runs into hard practical limits. Rose was an independent adult, behind the wheel of her own car, moving through public space with the freedom and unpredictability that comes with mobility. Summer was a 5-year-old child, stationary inside the walls of her home, surrounded by family. One disappearance left behind a car in a public parking lot, an object that became the focal point of the investigation. The other left no trace at all, no item, no location, nothing to anchor the search. The skill set, planning, and psychology required to intercept an adult in transit are fundamentally different from those needed to remove a child from a domestic environment. Criminal offenders, especially those who succeed in avoiding detection, often have a preferred type of victim and a familiar method. Crossing from one victim profile and setting to the other is not impossible, but it is rare, and doing so without leaving a forensic or behavioral signature would be rarer still. Geography also weighs heavily against the one offender hypothesis. The incidents occurred in different states, separated by hundreds of miles. While it is not unheard of for offenders to operate across state lines, particularly those with transient lifestyles, trucking routes, or seasonal work, it adds complexity to the theory. To sustain it, one must assume that the same person either maintained contact with the family over a long distance or returned deliberately to strike again. Both require motive and persistence of a kind that should, by now, have left some investigative footprint, yet none has been identified. An alternative view holds that the two cases are entirely independent, their connection purely familial. In this reading, each disappearance has its own context, its own actors, and its own mechanisms, with the similarities explained by coincidence rather than causation. The differences in victim profile, circumstances, and setting are seen not as challenges to be reconciled, but as indicators that the cases do not intersect. This position gains strength from the absence of any shared suspect, forensic match, or witness account linking the events. Without such a bridge, the cases remain parallel lines that never truly meet. There is also the possibility that at least one of the disappearances involved no external perpetrator at all. In that scenario, the question of a shared offender becomes irrelevant. If one case resulted from an accident, disorientation, or a voluntary departure, and the other from an act of foul play, the overlap vanishes entirely. The difficulty lies in proving a negative without a body, a crime scene, or decisive evidence. The absence of a perpetrator cannot be confirmed any more than their presence. For investigators, the prudent stance is neither to force a connection nor to dismiss it outright. Instead, the linkage hypothesis should function as one of several investigative tracks, revisited periodically in light of new information. This means cross-referencing known persons of interest, comparing timelines of unrelated crimes in both regions, and looking for patterns in method, victimology, and opportunity that might bridge the gap between cases. The danger of overcommitting to the same perpetrator theory is that it can distort priorities, leading to missed opportunities in treating each case on its own merits. Conversely, ignoring the possibility entirely risks overlooking a link that could double the payoff of a breakthrough. The balance lies in disciplined openness, holding the door ajar just wide enough for the right piece of evidence to walk through. In the end, the question of one perpetrator or two is more than a matter of curiosity. It shapes the investigative lens. If there is one offender, finding them could solve both cases at once. If there are two, each will require its own path to resolution. And if there is none, if these tragedies share only bloodlines and silence, then the challenge is to accept coincidence without allowing it to erode the will to search. Until that line is drawn by proof, the possibility of connection remains both the most tantalizing and the most elusive thread in the fabric of these two disappearances. The disappearance of Summer Wells in 2021 ignited a level of public engagement that would have been unimaginable when Marie Bly went missing in 2009. From the moment the first alert went out, social media became the central meeting place for strangers determined to discuss, investigate, and in some cases, solve the case themselves. On Facebook, local community groups quickly grew into national forums with thousands of members. People shared news updates, analyzed interview clips, and speculated about every detail: who last saw Summer, what the property looked like, what the parents said or didn't say. TikTok creators uploaded short videos mapping timelines, showing aerial views of the Wells property, and offering their own theories. YouTube became home to hours-long live streams where hosts and viewers debated possible scenarios in real time, often reacting to breaking rumors within minutes. This attention was not passive. Viewers combed through public records, pulled up old property maps, and even traveled to Hawkins County to get a closer look at the area. Some sent potential leads directly to law enforcement, others posted their findings online for anyone to review. The sheer volume of people following the case meant that almost every new development, no matter how small, was dissected within hours. The intensity of this engagement had two faces. On one side, it created a massive, decentralized network of eyes and ears. People far outside Tennessee knew Summer's name and face, increasing the odds that a genuine sighting or clue could surface anywhere. On the other, it fueled an environment where rumor and speculation often blurred with fact. In the rush to contribute, Some users spread unverified claims, misinterpreted photos, or drew conclusions from incomplete information. For many participants, the case became a daily habit, checking updates, watching analysis videos, debating with other followers. That ongoing conversation kept the story alive in the public consciousness long after mainstream news outlets had moved on. In that sense, social media acted as a form of sustained advocacy, ensuring that Summer's name was never far from people's feeds. But the same energy also produced friction. Families and individuals connected to the case found themselves under relentless scrutiny. Innocent details, like a nervous gesture in an interview, were dissected as potential signs of guilt. The Wells family, in particular, became the focal point of both sympathy and hostility, with some online voices organizing prayer groups for Summer while others openly accused her parents of involvement without evidence. The disappearance of Summer Wells became not just a criminal case, but a shared online narrative, one that thousands of strangers felt invested in, emotionally and personally. The contrast to Rose's case in 2009 is sharp. Without the constant hum of online conversation, public interest in her disappearance stayed local and eventually faded from most people's awareness. Summer's story, by comparison, became a living, evolving discussion across platforms, shaped as much by the collective imagination of its followers as by the facts of the investigation. In the end, the public's role through social media has been both a lifeline and a complication. It has kept the search for Summer active in ways that traditional coverage alone could not, while also making the case a canvas for countless competing versions of the truth. That dynamic, passionate, messy, and impossible to fully direct, is now part of the reality of any high-profile disappearance in the digital age. Years have passed, yet both cases remain suspended in uncertainty. Key questions linger, questions that haunt the families, challenge investigators, and keep the public's attention alive. Where exactly was Rose Marie Bly in the final hours before her disappearance? If she never reached her intended destination in Cushing, what happened in that gap between her last phone call and the discovery of her car? Who left the vehicle in that Grantsburg parking lot, and why were the keys missing? Was she meeting someone she trusted, or did a chance encounter turn deadly? For Summer Wells, the gaps feel just as stark. How could a 5-year-old vanish from within sight of her family in broad daylight without a single confirmed witness? Why did tracking dogs lose her trail just meters from the basement door? Was she removed from the property quickly? Or did something happen there that no one has yet admitted? Why has no physical evidence surfaced despite an unprecedented search effort covering thousands of acres? Then there is the question that binds both mysteries. Is the connection between these cases coincidence, or is it a thread that has been overlooked for too long? If they are linked, does that point to an individual who has operated undetected for over a decade, or to something far more complicated within the family's own history? The hard truth is that both investigations reveal uncomfortable realities about missing person cases. First, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The lack of physical proof in either case has not diminished the likelihood that a crime occurred. Second, initial hours matter, and once they pass, the odds of recovering reliable leads drop sharply. Delays, missteps, or assumptions in those early stages can close doors that might never be reopened. From these cases, there are lessons worth carrying forward. For communities, vigilance is not paranoia, it is protection. A neighbor's memory of a strange car, a store clerk's recollection of a nervous customer, a hiker's sighting of something unusual, can all become the thread that unravels a mystery. For families, clarity and consistency in recounting events can prevent harmful speculation and help investigators focus on actionable leads. And for law enforcement, balancing transparency with the need to protect the integrity of an investigation is crucial in an era where public interest moves faster than official updates. But lessons are meaningless without action. Both Rose and Summer's cases show that awareness fades unless it is actively kept alive. That is where the public can make the difference. Share their names, faces, and timelines, not just when the anniversary comes around, but regularly, so they do not become footnotes in the archives of unsolved disappearances. If you live in or pass through the areas connected to these cases, revisit your own memories. Were you in St. Croix Falls, Cushing, or Grantsburg in late August 2009? Were you near Beech Creek or Rogersville on June 15, 2021? Did something seem off, even if it felt too small to matter? That detail might be the one that matters most now. Justice is not just the work of detectives. It is the result of persistence, by families, by communities, and by every individual who refuses to let the silence win. Somewhere, someone knows the truth about what happened to Rose and Summer. And until that truth is spoken, there will be no closure, no peace. If you have any information, no matter how minor it may seem, contact the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, or your local law enforcement. The answers to these questions will not appear on their own. They will come because someone decides today is the day to speak up. For Rose, for Summer, for the justice they deserve, and the safety of others who may still be at risk.